Oh, right. Before we go to agenda item 5, I'd like to welcome Stuart Turner, who is our independent member. So welcome onto the committee, Stuart. And we look forward to your input. I would also like to welcome Councillor John O'Lee, but he isn't here yet, so we'll wait until he arrives. Right, agenda item 5, Audit Committee Work Plan. Nick.
Thank you, Chair. So this work plan details the committee meetings between the 22nd of September, which was the new meeting date that we put in the diary at Council last week, the week before, regarding the approval and the adoption of the accounts for the 2021 financial year, all the way through to next July or April time. So again, we've got our normal reports that we would bring to each of the committees. Ones to note, we will be bringing an annual report to the 22nd of September, so that just covers the what this committee has done over the last financial year. Also then, we expect to bring the partnership register to the 2nd of February's meeting. Like I said, the remaining reports are similar to what we've had as a normal cycle of annual meetings, unless there are any other reports that members would like us to bring. So happy to open up to the floor if there are any other reports that members would like brought to the committee. Thank you, Chair. So this is the final report for the 2021 financial year in terms of Treasury management. So if we cast our mind back to February last year, we produced a Treasury management strategy for the 2021 financial year. It was reviewed by yourselves and recommended to Council for adoption, and that happened at March last year. That then sets the framework for officers to be able to borrow, invest, look at the different types of counterparties that we are able to invest and borrow from. We then brought a report back to this committee in November last year in terms of the update, so a half-year report, which again then was recommended on to Council. This then forms the final report, as I say, for the 2021 financial year in terms of the actual outturn for Treasury management for the year. Again, this will be recommended on to Council for their approval. So what this report sets out is the activity that's occurred during the year, benchmarking ourselves back to the prudential indicators that we set ourselves within the strategy that was approved, like I say, during February and March last financial year. The two tables within the cover report set out the main investments and external debt that the Council has, and that then goes into more detail within the actual Treasury management report. The report itself looks first at the national context around Treasury and the various markets, then looks at the local context, and what I would say is the table at 3.1 on page 16, there is a slight error in it, in that there shouldn't be brackets in that figure right at the very bottom. So it is an increase, whereas actually it's showing as a decrease because there's brackets on it. So it is an increase in borrowing, and that you can see from the 1st of April 2020 was 92,651,000, and there's now 95,436,000. Details at paragraph 3.3 suggest exactly where we've taken that long-term borrowing from, the amounts that we've taken, the rates that we've got, and the term that we've applied to each of those loans. And that's why you've got a slight difference in the rate, because we've taken the term on slightly different arrangements on the basis that we're looking to place that debt and spread it across a longer period, rather than having a lot of debt maturing at the same time, and then effectively then having interest rate risk around the fact that it depends what that interest rate is at that time if we then need to refinance that borrowing. The table then... sorry.
Can I just ask a question quickly? The Public Works Liability Book, is that still one of the cheapest ways we can borrow money?
If through you, yeah, that is one of the places, but again, we would look at various different places, and again, we'll speak to our Treasury advisors to look at what the most attractive rate is at the time.
I do know some of the smaller councils do actually use them against anyone else.
Yeah, that's right, and like I say,
I need it clear.
yeah, like I say, we'll look at a range of different options, and again, it'll all depend on how long we want it for. It could be more attractive. We've got some we've taken some short-term borrowing, things like that. It depends how long we want it for, and again, we'll speak to Link, our Treasury advisors, around the most attractive rates.
Okay, thank you.
The table at 4.1 then shows the investment balances that we have, and again that suggests that we've had £8.8 million more investments as at the 31st of March this year compared with the 1st of April last year, and again that was mainly due to the fact that we've had surplus funds in our bank account in terms of the business grants, those types of things that we've been able to receive from government that we potentially hadn't used at that particular point in time. The remaining tables within the report set out the various prudential indicators that we set ourselves, again within that strategy as approved in February last year, and just shows that in terms of all of those indicators, we actually complied with those indicators that we set ourselves. So there are various sections within there in the tables of 5.2 and 5.3, but yes, I can confirm that we did comply with all of our prudential indicators. Hopefully that's enough for you to ask some questions on, and I'll leave it to you guys if there's anything you want to ask.
Thank you, Councillor Michael. Just one quick question from me, Nick. In regards to the prudential indicators, the approved limits in tables 5.2 and 5.3, you mentioned that those were set in February of last year. Can I just ask how regularly they're reviewed to ensure that they are still current?
So we set them for ourselves for the year, but what we will do is, like we say, we'll bring a report back in the November cycle of meetings. So this year it'll be the 1st of December, which will be our half-year report, and that'll be again bringing it to yourselves to suggest this is where we found ourselves at. And if we need to make any revisions to those limits that we've created ourselves, then at that point in time we'll be seeking approval to make any amendments that we need to make. But again, we regularly review it as officers internally. It's just then we would come to you at that mid-year point.
Well, the recommendation is on page 13 that the Treasury outturn position for 2020-21 be considered, which we have done. So thank you. So now we'll go to agenda item 7, which is the annual internal audit report, which unfortunately Lucy has had to send her apologies this morning, so Nick will be taking it. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Chair. So I've been given a few words to set out as part of this report, but fundamentally what this report is, again, similar to the previous report, we set an audit plan during the February for the financial year. This committee then received progress reports against that throughout the year, setting out where the audit plan is in terms of the progress against that. And at the end of the financial year, the head of internal audit then presents this annual report, which gives you guys the assurance around what they've been able to find, and gives us some words that we can then enter into our annual governance statement, which we'll come to later on. So the purpose of the annual internal audit report is to meet the head of internal audit annual reporting requirements set out in the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards and the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2020. And in particular, it's to include an opinion on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's governance, risk and control framework, and therefore the extent to which the Council can rely on it. Also to inform how the plan was discharged and the overall outcomes of the work undertaken that supports the opinion, a statement on conformance with the PSIS and the results of the internal audit quality assurance, and draw attention to any issues particularly relevant to the annual governance statement. It's also to gain an understanding of the level of assurances being provided by the Head of Internal Audit over the Council's governance, risk and internal control arrangements and why, and to consider how well the internal audit function is performing. Overall, the opinion is based on assurances gathered across the Council during the response and recovery periods of the pandemic and the overall impact on the framework of governance, risk management and control. In informing the opinion, Lucy also drew upon other assurance intelligence across the Council, for instance, risk assurance. The report shows that, a positive assurance around the Council's arrangements, and that the Council has adapted quite well to the pandemic. In terms of governance and internal control, these are performing adequately, so this is a green amber, but as we can see at the table on page 26 of the agenda, they are an improving nature, so you can see that the performance from the last financial year has improved. In terms of financial control and risk, they are performing well, which again you can see that those have improved since last financial year. All areas are showing an upward trend, and that the Council is moving forward with continuous improvement. The report shows the rationale for the opinion, and the report this has been discussed with the senior leadership team. In terms of governance and the annual governance statement, there were no significant governance issues that they felt that needed to be included, but there have been some commentary around this committee and supporting its effectiveness. Hence, we took the decision at the last committee to bring in the independent member, and also a statement that was suggesting around the governance arrangements for the Towns Fund, the £25 million Towns Fund money that the Council has recently secured. These have been taken on by the Council, and we've added some wording in the annual governance statement around those things. In terms of the internal audit plan,
Nick, whilst you're on the governance, with regards to the governance review of culture and values in 2019-2020, can we revisit this in October? That was what I was going to ask Lucy.
So yes, we can accommodate that with Lucy. So we'll pick that up with Lucy outside of this.
Okay.
Sorry, on governance as well. Page 28. This year we have completed a review on the Robin Hood Hotel, where we identified that although the government's arrangements were adequate, is that good enough? Adequate?
In terms of that, I don't have the details to hand, but I can bring back the specific recommendations around that. So I understand it was a substantial report in terms of the overall report, yes. Yeah, I can bring back.
Is adequate to me. It's a bit hairy-fairy and adequate.
Yeah, like I say, what I can do is I can bring back. Yeah.
Just bring Sanjeev in.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think I can answer on that point. The reason why internal audit have said adequate was because of arrangements at the time of the audit. I represent the council on the board of the company RHH Limited, which brought forward the development. Where we had a bit of a weakness was there wasn't regular reporting back to the council. So we have a representative of the council who attends every board meeting. So and that was the monitoring officer. What we didn't have was regular management meetings between RHH Limited and the council, properly formalised and properly minuted. That is now happening. So that's been happening for the last 6 months.
Was that COVID?
Partly COVID, but also partly the assumption, rightly or wrongly, was since I was sitting on the board of directors, I would always have the interest of the council central to any decision making. And also because there was a representative, i.e. the monitoring officer, who was attending board meetings, then we felt as officers that was sufficient control over the activities of RHH Limited. But quite rightly, internal audit picked up the point that we should be having that formalised as having a feedback from myself back to the council and council representatives, and that would include Nick Wilson as the council representative. And that's been happening for the last 6 months. So the direction of travel when this report then comes back next year will be a positive one, because we've taken the recommendations into account and put measures in place to address it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Michael. Just to follow up on that point, I had a question around the links between escalating key project risks and the corporate risk register. How have those links been strengthened? Has that been through the measures that you just described, Sanjeev?
In terms of that then, in terms of project risk, the project manager will do a risk assessment on each project. Where it's deemed then that is a key project for the authority, that's then when it would then be escalated up into the corporate risk register.
Also, Chair, just to add to that, so again, the checks are, so if it's a major project, so there would be a project initiation document. So something that's been put in place now is that would then go to senior management team for approval, and senior management team would obviously scrutinise that to make sure that the key officers involved in the project across the authority are involved in the project, and there's a mechanism of reporting progress back through the capital projects group, which we've set up, which is the officer group, and then back to senior management.
In terms of the delivery of the internal audit plan, there have been 92% of the revised plan completed, and internal audit would like to thank the council for their help and support in terms of making that happen. Conscious that this year was a different year, and trying to do things a different way through Teams rather than through actually meeting people on site. They hadn't experienced any impairment to their independence or objectivity during the conduct and delivery of the internal audit plan. There were no unexpected restrictions to the work in terms of difficulties gaining access to information, and she doesn't feel that any restrictions had an adverse effect on the ability to deliver the overall opinion.
Nick, if I can jump in there, why was the combined assurance not done last year?
So in terms of the combined assurance report, so the combined assurance report assists internal audit in terms of getting a breadth of the organisation rather than just the specific internal audit reports that have been completed during the year. It allows them to look, as I say, across the council at all of the different areas and just look to see where management believe the risks are. So in terms of why that didn't get completed during last financial year, the work that would normally start around the combined assurance report starts in October, November, December time, which unfortunately last year was quite a heavy area in terms of the lockdown and COVID cases going up. So we felt that for last financial year, there just wasn't the time for officers to be able to spend doing that work, as opposed to actually responding to the COVID lockdown, and hence that's why for last year we didn't complete the combined assurance work. We do anticipate doing that again though for this financial year. It isn't just a key thing for this, but also it helps inform where the internal audit plan needs to be focused for the next financial year. So, like I say, we do anticipate picking that up again for this year, and unfortunately, that's then led to why one of the areas around internal control wasn't then brought up to performing well as opposed to performing adequately. Unless there are any other questions, that Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Chair. On page 20, which is agenda page 44, it outlines that there were 3 items or audits that had been removed. I assume they were deemed to be the lowest risk ones. Some of them were deferred. Those ones were removed. Would they just be picked up in the annual cycle for the following year? They were information governance, tourism and stakeholder engagement. So were they ones that are annual anyway, and they would just then pick up the following year? And I assume the risk of those not being done is quite low.
So in terms of those, I think the information governance one was going to be brought back into this financial year. In terms of the tourism one, I think we'd suggested yes, deferring that one into this year as well. I'm just looking at Joy.
In terms of those areas where we say we're not going to do them, what we normally do as part of the annual plan, we look at the areas we need to audit, and we assess the risk in terms of like where the council would benefit the most. And then we'll revisit that and then assess which ones need to be picked up. So as part of next year's planning, we'll be picking those areas up and assessing whether they need to be covered as part of next year's plan. But in the current plan, they are not included in there.
Thank you, Chair. Going to agenda page 29, there are descriptions around the positive change in culture with respect to the governance, and the report states that there is a clear message and commitment from the top to transform services and focus on the delivery of meaningful performance targets. May I just ask, with respect to this particular element of the report, what do we specifically mean by meaningful performance targets, and if those are KPIs, sort of how are they included on this basis?
Chair, can I answer that one? Yeah, the senior management team in the last 9 months have reviewed the performance framework, and since the council has recently revised its community plan, all of the performance framework and all of the KPIs are now linked closely to those community plans. How that's cascaded down then into business areas is through the business planning process. So business managers, when they draw up their business plans for the forthcoming year, really are looking forward to the next 3 years, but focusing on what they're going to deliver in the next year and how that's linked to the community plan. We've also, for the first time last year, introduced workshops where business managers actually come and present that business plan. And where the document really refers to further improvements, it's around tightening that reporting back to SLT and the senior management team on the delivery of those key performance indicators. I think when we first looked at the KPIs, there were over 200 KPIs across the organisation, which, started becoming really cumbersome, and we just felt, there wasn't the necessary focus on actually delivering real outcomes, on what's been established in our community plan. So that's the process we've now adopted. So there's a new framework linked to risk management, linked to our delivery of the community plan, and then business managers will be reporting on that. As well as that, we bring regular reports to our directorate meetings, and I personally, when I meet with my managers, will review the performance on those KPIs on a quarterly basis. So I've just finished the first quarter as far as the resource directorate is concerned, and the other directors will follow the same process. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Sanjeev. Are there any more questions on this agenda item? No? Well, if there's no further questions, the recommendation is on page 21 that the Audit and Accounts Committee consider and comment upon the annual internal audit report, which we have done so. So now we go to agenda item 8, which is the going concern status of the council. Again, that's Nick. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report sets out the reasons why we feel that the accounts that we produced and are on the agenda later on can be produced on a going concern basis. So the concept of a going concern assumes that an authority, its functions and services will continue in operational existence for the foreseeable future. The assumption underpins the accounts drawn up based on the local authority audit accounting code of practice, and it's made because the local authority carries out functions essential to the local community in terms of its existence. So should the authority feel that it's not a going concern, the accounts will be prepared on a slightly different basis. And hence, what we're trying to set out in this report is the reasons why we feel that we can produce the report, produce the account, sorry, on a going concern basis. So throughout the report, it sets out the various reasons why we feel that's the case through the council's current financial position. So as at the end of the 31st of March 2021, its access to funding through the investments that it holds and access to additional cash through, for instance, the PWLB. The balance sheet as at the 31st of March 21, the projected financial position based on the budget that was set and the medium-term financial plan that was set and taken to council in March this year. Also then in terms of the governance arrangements that we have to continually monitor the financial position throughout the authority. Again, then looking at the external environment and the control environment that we work within. So the fact that we are bound by government, and we've seen in other authorities how, for instance, Northampton and those types of places, the government will be involved and assist those authorities. So, like I said, what the report is setting out to do is just giving you the reasons why we feel that we can produce the accounts on a going concern basis. So happy to take any questions where there are any.
Right, first of all, for myself, where do we see the budget going for this year?
Thank you, Chair. So we've looked at the reports internally. So the first budget monitoring report will come to the September cycle of meetings. But at the moment, there's nothing that I can see that suggests that we're going to utilise all of our reserves during this financial year, and hence, therefore, I still feel that during this financial year. And looking at the budget for the next 4 years through the medium-term financial plan, we are sustainable over that period.
Right, thank you. Does anyone have any other questions? No? Well, the recommendation is on page 55, that members note the conclusion of the assessment made of the council status as a going concern for the purpose of the statement of accounts for 2021. To all those in favour? Right, thank you. Next, we have agenda item 9, which is the annual external audit strategy memorandum for 2021. David Hose, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think the key things to draw out of this paper for your attention, section 3 of the report sets out the audit timetable for the year, and with your permission, Chair, at the end of this agenda item, I'll give you a verbal update on progress because our audit work has started. Section 4 is the element of our report that sets out those significant and enhanced audit risks and those key judgment areas that we're going to focus on. The significant risks are unchanged from last year for committee members. I think the things members should note in that report are the things that we're saying are new this year that we need to focus on audit time around changes to the finance system, around the Robin Hood Hotel project and the leases that go with that, just areas where we need to focus more audit effort. And a significant point in there around COVID-19 grants. The authorities received a significant amount of grant funding during the year, and there's some audit work for us to do there to ensure that actually it's just being properly accounted for, because those grants are differently structured in different places. Section 5, and probably the biggest change in our work this year, is that this document sets out the work that we have to do around value for money. And there's been a fundamental change in our work in that area this year. Historically, in our statutory audit opinion, we've had to conclude if the authority had appropriate affairs in place to ensure value for money. This year we'll have to report very differently to you. So we will have to report under those 3 separate headings that we set out in the document, free-form reporting in a separate annual audit report. So there's a significant amount of additional work for us to do there so that we can actually give you a very tailored report that specifically relates to Newark and Sherwood rather than just a one-liner in an audit report. So that is a fundamental change in our work this year that is impacting the sector as a whole. And section 6 of the report, Chair, is the area where we set out our fee position for the year. And as members will see, effectively that value for money piece of work that I've just talked you through does have a significant impact on our work for the year. And that is an approach that's being applied by Mazars across the sector and all of the other firms that are active in the sector. So I think, Chair, those are the headlines I would draw out from the document. And I would probably just pause there and take questions from the committee.
Right, thank you, David. Yes, £10,000 is more than a quarter of the original actual scale fee. How much assurance do we get for that money?
Sorry, Chair, how much?
How much assurance do we get for that extra money?
I think actually, Chair, the difference with that fee is effectively the level of personnel for my organisation that will have to do that work. I suspect historically value for money work has tended to be done by fairly junior members of the audit team. I think as soon as we get into having to do the work and then drafting of free-form reports, then you're talking about significant time from myself and my manager teams, really. So I think it will be beneficial to the authority because instead of just being a bland one-liner in an audit report that says we're happy, paraphrasing, it will actually have to give you more narrative around the things that we've considered, why we're happy that you've got arrangements in place. So I think there will be more there that you'll be able to take assurance from because it will be specifically tailored to this authority.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions at this stage? No? My other, what I was going to ask David was if you could give us a brief update where you are in the audit and what you have found so far.
Thank you, Chair. So I think as the document suggests, our audit field work started at the beginning of July. I think we're approximately halfway through our audit field work. I think we've got about 2 or 3 man weeks left. To date, Chair, there is nothing significant coming out of our audit work that I wish to feed back to this committee. There's certainly nothing emerging in terms of any areas that could have potentially material changes to the numbers. My caveat to that would always be is that some of those high-risk areas, so our work on property, plant and equipment valuations, for example, is ongoing. So we haven't drawn a conclusion on that as yet. But at this moment in time, nothing to bring to the committee's attention. It's all going well.
Right, thank you. On the materiality and misstatements, what does it mean in practice? Is a figure where you've got a figure of 1,1805 million? Is 1.6 million? Would that not be corrected?
I think, Chair. Apologies. What would typically happen, Chair, is we quote in that document a triviality threshold. So anything above that number, I think we would certainly be including in our reporting to this committee and discussing with management. So in your example, a 1.6 million error, if we found one, wouldn't be swept under the carpet. It would be included in our reporting. And we would be suggesting to management that they should make that correction. Actually, it's well within management's right then below materiality to say, actually, we don't believe we want to this year. So it would be certainly brought to your attention, and committee should remember that's a cumulative number as well. So if we found 5 £400,000 errors, we would be saying cumulatively that's material and you need to be changing the financial statements. But nothing coming to light at the moment to suggest there are any issues of that nature.
Yes, I think maybe you've really answered my next question, because my next question was with regards to the 68 million. what if you found 2 to 3 at 68 million in different audits? And also, what if you found 2 to 3 of 68 million in the same audit?
So the 68,000, Chair, apologies, is that number above which we would include errors that we found in our reporting to you. So, but I think actually, as you say, the 1.8 million is the important number. That's the cumulative threshold of which if we found errors and adjustments, we would be saying, actually, we think you do need to make those changes, otherwise it's going to impact on our audit opinion.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? No. Well, if there's no further questions, the recommendation on page 57 is that the committee notes the external audit strategy memorandum, which I've done. So, all those in favour? Thank you. Thank you very much, David. Next, we have agenda item 10, which is the underlying pensions assumptions for 2020-21 statement of accounts, and that again is Nick.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the underlying pension assumptions for the 2021 financial year in terms of the numbers that are produced into the statement of accounts. So what the document at Appendix A sets out is the report from the Council's actuary, who are administered by the Nottinghamshire County Council Pension Fund. They have set out exactly all of the various different assumptions that they've used in order to calculate the large number that's in the council's accounts within the balance sheet. So what that number sets out is the council's liability over or at the 31st of March going forward in relation to pensions. So what we've done, because it's such a large number, it's probably the second largest number under the property, plant and equipment figure. We've brought this report to this committee for the committee to scrutinise in terms of how that figure has been arrived at, so that when we approve the accounts in September, you've been able to gain assurance over how that number has effectively been calculated. So any questions that you may have regarding that, if you would like to feed those to me, I can then seek some more assurance through from Barnet Waddingham. And if there is anything that we feel strongly enough around wanting to change, so it may be mortality rates, it may be amount of cash that's taken out at a point in time when employees take their benefits, we can go and ask those questions to the actuary as to whether or not there is some changes that potentially may need to be made, and then we can feed those numbers into our final accounts that we would bring back in September. But again, as I say, if you've got any questions, we can feed them and I can bring them back to the committee.
Councillor Crowe.
Thank you, Chairman. This item, Nick, really does have to go fully on assumptions. I don't see how you can do anything else but assume various items, various things that happen. You don't know how many people are going to die. You don't know how many people are going to want early pensions. So I'm quite happy, to be honest with you, for assumptions to be made on this one, and I have no problem in voting for it.
Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. My question just relates to page 97, the table in paragraph 4, the additional assumptions. I was just wondering whether it might be possible to see what basis those assumptions have been made upon from Barnet Waddingham. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that's not a problem. We can ask that question and we can get some more assurance, and we can bring that. We can circulate that around to the committee prior to the next committee meeting.
Jono.
Oh, sorry.
Chairman, I just wanted to apologise for being late. I was at Counter Hall and got caught in traffic, so I do apologise. I just wanted to check with Sanjeev, if possible, as we're talking about the County Council Pension Fund and I sit on the County Council, would that be a personal interest?
Chair, no, it wouldn't. no, there's no personal interest in that.
Right. Thank you for that, Councillor Lee, and welcome onto the committee. Right, well, the recommendation is on page 98 that members note and approve the assumptions used in the calculation of pension figures for 2021. So all those in favour? Right, thank you. Now we'll go to agenda item 11, which is the underlying valuation assumptions for 2021 statement of accounts. Again, it's Nick.
Thank you, Chair. So again, this report is similar to the previous report in terms of that was to do with the pensions number. This is to do with the property, plant and equipment number, which is the biggest number in the balance sheet. The council contracts out valuation services to Wilkes, Head and Eves, so they are a firm of valuers, so they are an independent valuer on which the council places its reliance in terms of being able to come up with those valuation numbers on our property, plant and equipment. We will, during the financial year, we set out to them exactly what we want them to complete on our behalf. We have a rolling programme of every 5 years. All of the property, plant and equipment must be valued, and that's set out within the CITFA Code of Practice on Accounting. Appendix B, that schedule of assets is presented to you in terms of those ones that have been valued during this financial year. The report at Appendix A sets out those assumptions that Wilkes, Head and Eve have used in order to be able to calculate the numbers that again are within that draft statement of accounts that we'll review at the next item. And again, you've got the ability here to potentially challenge some of those assumptions that they've used in order to be able to calculate the number. Again, as suggested in the slightly earlier report regarding the audit, as we've suggested, that audit is ongoing and the PPE is currently being audited. So any assumption changes that we may make through Wilkes, Head and Eve would have an impact on the audit in terms of what they're looking at the moment. But the report is here for you to be able to scrutinise, as I say, those assumptions that our external valuer has put together. Happy to take any questions.
Right, does anyone have any questions? For the committee members, there are many of the assets which are missing, and as Nick did explain, they are assessed on a 5-year basis, so not all of the assets are assessed the same every year. No questions? Well, the recommendation is on page 123 that members note and approve the assumptions used in the calculation of asset valuation figures for 2021. So all those in favour? Right, thank you. Next we have agenda item 12, which is the unaudited statement of accounts, for which we did have the training last week. So, Nick.
Thank you, Chair. So normally at this committee we would be bringing the audited statement of accounts alongside the audit completion report. But for this financial year, as you were aware from last financial year, that the date at which we have to have our published audited accounts online was pushed back through due to the pandemic. And similarly, this year, for this financial year, legislation was set out in order for us to be able to have, by the 30th of September, an approved and adopted set of accounts that's been through audit. What we felt that we didn't want to happen was that at that point in time in September, that was the first time that members were seeing the accounts, and hence you were being asked to approve a 100 and something page document within a week, and hence that's the first time that you've seen it when you're asked to approve it. Hence we've brought the draft set of accounts to you now in order for you to be able to review, feed into in terms of any questions that you may have. Again, as you've heard earlier on, the audit is ongoing at the moment, and as at the moment, albeit yes, there's still some more work to do, but there's been no amendments that have been suggested. But as caveated, there's still some work left to do. Again, like I say, it's for you guys to just gain the assurance, have a review of the document before you're going to be asked to approve that document in September. As suggested earlier, we went through the document and the main areas that that you may want to look at last week at the training session. So here, if you've got any questions, then happy to take any now. If you have any during the period of the audit, again, happy to take those, and we'll feed those into the auditors if any suggestions in terms of amendments are made. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Lee.
Chairman, thank you very much. A few questions. I'm going to try and ask them all at once, and then obviously, I've still not had any communication about the notes at the beginning of our area. Obviously, we went through that, and I had some concerns that a little bit not misleading, but probably wasn't in the best context of what we stand for as this council. And then the other bit that I picked up on at the end is we are looking at, as you're aware, of changing maybe the dynamics of this council, especially how the councillors sit from a cabinet to from a committee to a cabinet. Have we put any finances in place? Because obviously there's going to be, from what I can see, there could be quite a large financial change from one to the other. And has any money been allocated for that?
So in terms of the first item, I spoke to Comms on Thursday last week, just before I spoke to yourself. So I anticipate them calling you at some point, but I'll get them to, I'll divvy them up and ask them to come back. In terms of the second point, so within this financial document, because this is a looking back document, there won't be anything within here in terms of the changes, albeit we've reflected in the annual governance statement the fact that you know, we're looking to potentially change the system of governance. That was approved at April's council in terms of the changes that we may want to make, with the report coming back to December's council to approve those changes from May next year to be in place. In terms of the budget, what we did during this financial year, or for the new financial year, is we left it as is, because as yet the changes haven't been approved. So at the point in time when changes are approved, we can review the budget position to see whether or not there'd be a positive or negative impact on that. But I don't see it to be a material impact.
I appreciate that, thank you.
Do you have any further questions? Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 questions, so I'll just set those out in order. Happy to repeat anything. With respect to the annual governance statement, which is on page 144 of the draft statement of accounts narrative report 2021, with respect to the new system of working, which is to be implemented from May 2022, are we confident that that will meet all of the recommendations from the external governance review, or are additional actions required? Then, with respect to page 145, the Assurance Lincolnshire model, it's described that review has been delayed. Is there a revised target completion date, and are there any risks associated with that delay? And finally, on page 147, paragraph 5, with respect to the York Drive development, the report describes that there remain key risks to address with delivery from a technical and financial perspective. How will the efficacy of mitigating actions be monitored with respect to that?
Do you want me to come in on the governance? Chair, through you, on your question on governance, yes, we're very confident that the new governance arrangements in moving from a committee system to an executive leader model would address all of the issues that have been raised around governance. So there is a member party set up, working group set up, and an officer group set up to look at all the recommendations that have been made and therefore make sure that they're implemented in the new model. So that's the question on the governance. Stuart, could I just ask you to repeat the other 2, if you don't mind?
Yes, certainly. So the second question was related to page 145, describing the Assurance Lincolnshire model. That mentions that the review to that model has been delayed. I was just wondering whether a revised target completion date had been set and whether there were any risks associated with the delay. And then the second question page 147, paragraph 5, with respect to the York Drive development, the report described that there remain key risks to address with delivery from a technical and financial perspective. I was just wondering, how will the efficacy of those mitigating actions be monitored?
Nick, can you answer the one on the Lincolnshire model?
Yeah, in terms of the culture event that we referenced earlier on, so having spoken to Lucy Pledge, the head of internal audit, last week regarding that, so we are looking to bring something back in October. I think that's what we suggested earlier on. So that was, we referenced that earlier on during the annual audit report. So we'll be bringing something back again to kick off from October this year.
Yeah, and with regard to the York Drive project, there's some further work that's been done, and there's some technical issues on the site. The way that will be reported through would be through Policy and Finance Committee. If there are major changes to the project which result from the findings of the technical surveys, so that would be reported through to Policy and Finance Committee.
Are there any further questions? Well, if members do have any further questions, then they can come back to Nick between now and September, because there's still time to do so. So with that, then the recommendations are on page 179, that A, members note the annual governance statement for the financial year ended 31st of March 2021, and B, members note the draft statement of accounts for the financial year ended 31st March 2021 and agree to bring them being submitted to the external auditors for audit and certification. So all those in favour? Right, thank you. Next, we have agenda item 13, the internal audit progress report. McJoy, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, firstly, I just want to explain what happens with these progress reports. We produce them, and basically we are giving an update in terms of like the audit work which we've undertaken, and a highlight of any matters which the committee needs to know to inform, its role. So in terms of like the work which we have completed, the annual work 2020-21, as Nick highlighted earlier on, we've managed to achieve 92% of the revised plan. But one thing which the committee needs to note is earlier, when we brought a report back in February, our completion rate was 41%, partly because of the COVID. But then, as you can see, we've put a lot of measures in terms of like our work to speed that up. And we are happy to report that that is working pretty well. And 92% is pretty good compared to previous year, which was 78%. The other thing I just want to highlight on that one, on the report itself, on page 317 of the agenda. Basically, the progress from the last report to now, we've completed 9 assurance pieces of work and also 1 financial piece of work. And out of that, 8 of those assurance work, we are able to give a positive assurance on those, high or substantial, which was quite good. We only had 1 limited assurance report during that period. And the limited assurance relates to Newark Castle. The other base I just want to highlight in there is the work that is in progress. So at present, we've got 12 audits in progress. 4 of those, they are at the draft report stage, and the others, they are field work. Going back to the limited reports, touching on the New Cast one, we identified a number of issues there that need improving. But when we had discussions with management, the key underlying cause of that, I think some of those issues were inherited from the previous administration. But they've picked those up and they continue to address those. So as part of that report, we agreed 14 actions which they need to address. And we are pleased to report that out of those 14 actions, 8 were high and 6 were medium. But 7 of the high actions, they've been addressed. And work continues to address the remainder. I will now move on to the action tracker. What we do is we do a desktop review of all the actions we've agreed with management. And then we report on those in terms of like completion. As part of our report, we found that there are 24 actions that had surpassed their due date. And the 18 of those, they are with relevant directors to agree extensions and all that kind of thing. But 5 actions had previously been agreed the extension by the directors, and they are still outstanding. So it's those actions which we need the committee to review and consider whether extension is necessary. There was one action which the committee had already extended the date, and we now believe that that has been addressed. So that will be coming out of there. The other elements I just want to highlight is the 2021-22 audit plan. As mentioned earlier on, we removed some audits and we added 2 ICT audits, which the committee approved. The area we removed was digital strategy, but we'll be picking this up in the future planning as part of the audit process. We've added also, management asked us to add one additional audit, which is the test and trace grant payments, because that requires internal audit certification. So that is in there as well. On benchmarking, which is on page 328, I just want to highlight one point there. The number of the percentage of recommendations which are being implemented, there was improvement on that with 71% of the agreed recommendations being implemented compared to 67 in the previous year. Yeah, so in terms of like the items I just wanted to cover as part of this progress report, they are the ones, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Right, thank you for that report. The one agreed action that had been completed, I assume that is community centres?
It is community centres.
Yes, so that is the one that is completed. Of the 5, the 2 with regards to flooding, did you want to speak on those, Nick?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so in terms of what we would normally do in this instance is ask the business managers to come in and just update the committee in terms of where they are with those. Unfortunately, due to leave and at the moment trying to restrict officers to those that are presenting reports. I've got a response in terms of those 2 actions in relation to flooding from Alan Batty. So at the moment, they are 60% progressed. The Environment Agency has completed the local plan. Local copies have been changed to reflect this. A further review of the LRF generic flood guidance document has been delayed until an unknown date at the moment, owing to the COVID pressure on the Environment Agency. The local guidance remains current. The debriefing events during for the events during 2020 are underway, and meetings have been held with partners and parish councils to consider potential changes to alert levels and evacuation plans. I believe at the moment they haven't given me a target completion date, but I would expect by the end of the calendar year that those items will be able to be completed.
Right. Did any members want to come in on that particular one?
No, not that one, sorry. No. Sorry, Chairman, I did have 11 questions. You just asked one. Mac Joy answered another when he was doing his speech, but I do have 11 questions that I need to speak on whenever you allow it.
Right, well, I was just going to, are you going to speak on the other three that are outstanding?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the other three actions that were all down for the business manager, HR, within the report it's suggesting potential completion dates. The first item we believe has already been completed. The second two items are looking to be completed within the autumn and at September's policy and finance. And those three items are mainly due to the business manager HR being off for some time recently. And that's why they've gone over their original completion date.
Right, well, do we have the committee's consent to allowing these to go to a later date? On
I've got 9 questions.
Okay, well, Jono was first, so I'll let Jono come in first.
I'm hoping I'm asking the question at the right time. As I've made aware from day one, is I'm really concerned about relinquishing our community centres. We can only get rid of the assets once. I've had concerns with other parish councils and how they've ran community centres when we've handed them over, and they've not always put the community first. They've openly stated in the past that they have to make a certain amount of money to be able to run them, and they will put that first before the community. I won't mention which parish council it is, but major concerns that has now making me worried about relinquishing any more, because at least this council will put the community first, more than making money for them communities. So the two questions are, one, can we reconsider signing over the community centres, and two, if we do, can we make sure that it is put in some form of writing that the community will be put before any financial gain, and if they're not able to do that, then they shouldn't be considering taking them.
Thank you. So in terms of this audit report, one of the actions was similar to that point in that could we as an organisation impart on to the lessors the types of arrangements or the types of activities that we would want them to complete as part of their financial year, to make sure that it was consistent with what we've got in our community plan. And we felt because the leases are signed and in place and they are long leases, we couldn't actually complete that. So in terms of the activity, I don't think for the ones that we've already got leases in place for, we can impart that upon them. Certainly in future ones that we may look at doing, we can certainly do that, and that'll be, would it be homes and communities that will look after that, and that'll be for those that committee to decide whether or not that's appropriate or not.
Can I come back on that if possible? So two of them that we're talking about at the moment, I am going to mention two we're talking about. One is Fernwood and one was another village, I can't remember off the top of my head. Just to confirm, they have not been rubber stamped yet. There is still ongoing discussions with them. Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Crowe.
Sorry, thank you. Yes, I have a question on community centres also. Page 343, at the top of the column, it says a wider report is required about the current position and future plans of our 4 community centres. My question is, has the wider plan been concluded, and what recommendations have been put to SLT and H&C?
Chair, that plan hasn't been completed and it hasn't been considered by SLT yet, so it's a work in progress. but it would also come to members once, you know, that process had been followed. It would go to Homes and Communities Committee for them to consider. So it's still work in progress.
So do we have a date or an idea of a date?
I can't give you a date as I sit here today, but I can come back to you.
Thank you very much, Sandy.
Councillor Crowe, have you got some more questions?
Yeah, do you want me to take them all at once?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. Yeah, sorry, can you just repeat your?
Yeah, sorry. The castle being a major part of Newark, you've put here in the assurance high, controls have been evaluated as adequate and given it a high assurance. Do you not think that such an iconic building in Newark deserves something more than an evaluated figure? I'm sorry, Matt.
Oh yeah, I'm just trying to understand. This is relating to the Newark Castle, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the assurance level we gave on that one is limited.
Councillor Crowe, whereabouts are you? Because
Sorry?
Newark Castle is limited assurance. So whereabouts are you?
High, risk of the activity not being achieving its objectives or outcome is low. Controls have been evaluated as adequate.
Yeah,
High assurance.
yeah, but it isn't high assurance, it's limited. Newark Castle is limited.
Why isn't it limited?
Look on page 3, top of page 331, it says Newark Castle Limited Assurance.
I'll come into that one in a minute.
Councillor Crowe, what page are you on?
330.
330.
Your 330 is your assurance definitions.
Yeah.
That's telling you what each one stands for.
Okay, so
And Newark Castle is the one limited assurance.
on appendix 2 you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay. Limited level of confidence. Okay, fine. Yes, I've got it actually in blue. So just under the ranking list recommendations. Okay, I can leave that one there. Page 331, Newark Castle, critical review, etc. gives limited level of confidence, etc. Also stated that the management of key risks, etc. you feel it would never or would not achieve its objectives. Can I just ask why you believe it won't achieve its objectives?
Yeah, I think these are the standard definitions which we use to assess where our assurance levels are. And they are generic statements. And in terms of like our assessment of the Newark Castle, that's where it falls in terms of like where we think it is. And the main reasons underlying our assessment, they are the ones that are covered in the, that are covered on the, that are covered that are covered in the executive summary, which is page 332, all the way through to the management responses as well. So those are the main reasons and where we drew our assurances from. But the definition, I mean, the text you just read, that is just our definition, which we just apply in terms of like where we fit our assurance level.
May I just ask now on page 331, the Castleman's Gardens are currently open to the public for free, and yet then it goes on to talk about there are various income streams currently in place, including. Do you not think this is an asset? We should not really look for an income stream for something that is open to the public, and we're not collecting money on the gate or anything like that. For the sake, you know, it's a public asset to you. I don't think it should have.
Chair, I think that's quite a different matter because I think as far as the internal audit findings are concerned, Councillor Crowe, there are a number of areas where internal audit have identified that further work needs to be done in having a forward plan for maintaining the castle, being such a prominent asset for the council. That work is now being undertaken, so reviews being done by our corporate property section. This is our new corporate property service area, working with heritage and culture in devising a plan for the maintenance of the castle. So I think the report before you really suggests there's that work to be done, and that's why it's a limited assurance. As far as income generation is concerned, quite rightly, we don't charge people to walk through the grounds of the castle. Where the income is generated from is small wedding events or reception events where we will charge a small fee, which basically covers the administration of running those events. That was a separate report that went to Policy and Finance. It's also part of our fees and charges report, which goes annually to Council for approval. I suggest it's not for this committee to be making decisions on whether we should be charging for that facility or not. That's for Policy and Finance to decide.
But don't you agree that also that we shouldn't be making those assumptions or whatever, but we should be guiding Policy and Finance as a committee, as an audit committee?
Chair, it's within the gift of this committee to make a recommendation to Policy and Finance.
Okay.
If it sees fit.
Okay, thank you. I can cross that one out now. So that's shortened it a lot. Can I go on to page 3?
Thank you, Chair. So this is just the audit. So as much as the works are still being done, this is just the audit on that function. I think the main reason this was taken out was due to activity, but also due to during the year, I think the housing section had lost quite a few of their senior managers within that team, and hence we felt that we just needed to defer it. In order to pick that up again later once activity starts again, and also when further management are in place in order to look after that function.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, Michael.
Yeah, some elements which we wanted to test as part of that, they will be covered as part of, there's another audit in the current financial year, which is the landlord compliance. So some elements will be covered within that, but then we'll be exploring all the other elements we wanted to cover as part of that audit in the future plans.
Yes, Chair, absolutely, that's been followed up. There is a work plan that was developed to make sure all cybersecurity issues are addressed, and there's a regular report that comes to the Corporate Information Group, which meets regularly every 6 weeks. So yes, I can inform you that that's been followed up and implemented.
Thank you.
I think, as I suggested earlier on, so the first action there, the review and update managing attendance policy and attendance management toolkit, that's implemented now. The second one, it's the intention to get that to provide the training during the autumn this financial year, and that, like I say, that's mainly because the HR manager's been off for some time, so they hadn't facilitated that training, but we are anticipating getting that done by autumn this year.
Thank you, Nick.
Right, Councillor Cumberledge.
Thank you, Chair. I think this question might relate to, I guess, how something identified in the audit comes back to us as sort of an internal control then. So the audit, so the Newcastle was identified as the sort of limited assurance. Am I right in saying that it obviously identified a number of things, that's now gone internal to the business team to then start progressing with those things? Now, will this audit just then be done again in a year's time, and we then have sort of internal controls and checks every so often to check that all those things are on track? Does that make sense?
Sure. So what happens is all of those actions that are agreed as part of that audit are given to the business manager, but they're also picked up by McJoy. What happens internally then is every month those spreadsheet goes round with all of those actions on, and the business manager is asked to comment on the progress against those. In terms of then feeding that back up to directors in terms of how those actions are being completed, as suggested earlier on by Sanjeev, we have our directorate team meetings. So all of the business managers will respond to internal audit to say, you know, we're 25% complete against this action, even though the action is not necessarily needed until the end of September. We'll comment on the progress, and hence that's then fed back into the directors so that they're kept abreast of where those actions are or how those actions are being completed. Again, then should the action not be completed by the original date, that'd be for the director to approve any extension. It'll then be reported to this committee where the action still hasn't been completed. Hence, that's where we've got these 6 actions here. And as we've suggested, one of them has now been completed in terms of that community centre, or part of it in terms of that community centres, and the rest of them we're just asking this committee to approve the slight extension in terms of getting those actions completed.
Councillor Lee.
Chairman, thank you very much. It's just a follow-up question from Councillor Crow's question about the castle. I'm going to ask a main question, and then there might be a follow-up question depending on the answer. Can I just confirm if there has been any look at charging the general public? I know you mentioned about wedding guests, about the general public in using that facility.
No, that's not under consideration.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, well, if we go back to the 5 actions, because we need the committee's approval for these to be done at a later date, so, and they have all been aired quite well, so can I have the committee's approval for these 5 actions to be completed later? Yes? Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further questions? Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. I just have 2 questions with respect to Newark Castle and one with respect to KPIs, so I'll address the Newark Castle ones first. On page 326, the report mentions there are financial and reputational risks to the authority. Do we have a clear view on the impact of those risks? And page 332, on Appendix 2, there's a description that the Castle team will drive forward a plan that pulls together all areas of necessary development. has a timeline been developed for the delivery of that particular plan? And then moving on to the KPIs on page 328, will the corrective actions identified bring the timescale KPIs back on target? And do we know when we might see that they're having an effect? Thank you.
If I can come to the second question first, because that's what I got. In terms of the castle, yes, a time frame would have been put in place. So as part of the internal audit reports and as part of the debrief of them, the recommendations and areas identified are picked up by internal audit, and hence there'll be a number of those recommendations that are made. Management then come back with an action that needs to be completed in order to correct that recommendation. And hence a time frame is put upon those, and those are the things that we've just been talking our way through in terms of the 5 that are outstanding at the moment. So in terms of that report, yes, there will have been a time frame put in place, and I think Joy alluded to earlier on, a lot of those actions that were put in place have been completed, and the remaining ones aren't due for completion as yet. In terms of your first question, can you just repeat that one first?
Yes, certainly. That was agenda page 326. The report mentions that there are financial and reputational risks to the authority. Do we have a clear view on the potential impact of those risks?
Yes, Chair, if I can answer that one. So we do have a clearer picture as to the possible impacts of the findings of internal audit. So what's been developed is a full maintenance plan now on the castle, which identifies the works that need to be completed over a period of time and what the financial cost of that is. Also, I would anticipate, but Chair, I would have to check this, I would anticipate this would be in the operational risk register of corporate property. So, you know, corporate property have got a risk register, and the council would feature on that risk register, which would identify the risk and the mitigating actions against that risk. I'm happy to share that afterwards with yourself.
Then, just in terms of your last question regarding KPIs, Joy, are you okay to respond on that one? I don't know if Stuart, if you could just repeat that question.
Yes, certainly. Thank you. With respect to the KPIs on agenda page 328, with respect to the time-bound KPIs, will the corrective actions identified below that table bring the timescale KPIs back on target? And when will we know that they're having an effect?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Some of the KPIs on the time scale, part of that is because of the impact of COVID. So it slowed in terms of like the time it takes from completing the field work to reporting, doing the draft report and all that kind of thing. But we've been working with management, and we'll be assessing the effectiveness of the measures we've put in place during the current financial year. And we've more or less like put the message across all directorates of the importance of engaging with the audit as we continue with our work. The other thing, we've also set one of the targets. We used to report on 3 months period from start to the end, but we've stretched that now, and then that is kind of like bringing that challenge to the auditors as well as management to comply within that time framework. So that has reduced to 2 months now. So we'll be observing that and the measuring progress against that.
Chair, just on that, I would certainly be looking for an improvement on those KPIs, and you know, Nick and I have had those discussions with internal audit. Also, SLT have considered this. Clearly, you know, it's been an unusual year, hasn't it? And due to the lack of availability of staffing, both, you know, from the council's perspective, but also from internal audit's perspective, because of the sheer workload, you know, other stuff that's been going on this year, there has been a, you know, fairly significant slippage in those KPIs. But I would certainly be looking for in the next financial year for those KPIs to be, you know, pretty much hitting target.
Okay, Nick?
Yeah, just to add on from there, just one other thing to reflect on. In terms of the previous report, we'd seen an overall improvement in the internal audit plan completions. I think last year was it 77%, Joy, in the 1920 year, whereas again, albeit yes, the performance in terms of the contemporariness of the reports, hence the fact that they've not been necessarily completed within a 3-month span, albeit the overall performance of audits completed has increased by around 15%.
Right, so do we have any more questions? No? Well, thank you very much, Joy, for that report. The recommendation is on page 313 that the Audit and Accounts Committee consider and comment upon the latest internal audit progress report and approve the extensions to the implementation dates, which we have done. So all those in favour? Thank you. Next we go on to